Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining in on this recording of another Combine resource session. Today, we are partnering with our statewide sponsor, Lutz Financial and Accounting, and we're fortunate to have Russ Smith joining us. Russ is going to be sharing about the Nebraska Microenterprise Tax Credit, as well as a couple of other programs we're briefly going to overview. But before I hand it over to Russ, if this is your first time watching Combine resource program, a little bit of background about our incubator. The Combine was started in 2019 by Invest Nebraska. We support early stage ag tech entrepreneurs across the state. We have our Insights Network, which pairs up entrepreneurs with local producers across the state. And ultimately, because our partnership and our parent organization is Invest Nebraska, we do have the ability to invest in ag tech entrepreneurs across the state. And ultimately, our long-term goal is how can we make Nebraska the best place to start and scale an ag tech business? But now back to Russ. Russ, thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we're looking forward to the content.
Thanks, Matt. Like Matt said, I'm Russ Smith. I'm with Lutz in Omaha. We're actually an accounting and financial services, talent recruitment, even IT firm. I'm located in Omaha. We've got offices in Omaha, Lincoln, Grand Island, and Hastings. A little bit about myself. I specialize exclusively in state and local tax matters, credits and incentives, anything related to state taxation. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the Nebraska Microenterprise Tax Credit Program, and then maybe briefly mention some other programs, but primarily the micro, as we call it, the micro credit. So I've got some slides here. What we're going to talk about is the micro credit program, what it is, and maybe a lot of you have heard of it already. Maybe you've even taken advantage of it in the past. So I'm going to give you kind of an update on what it is, an overview of how the program works, and what the potential benefits are. This is really a pretty simple program in theory. The devil's in the details, and the state sometimes makes it a little bit harder to actually get some tax credits out of this program. But you'll see from my slides, it should be fairly simple. So this presentation probably won't take a ton of time. But so what we're talking about is the microenterprise credit. It's a Nebraska tax credit that's for small businesses. It allows up to a $20,000 lifetime refundable income tax credit. That $20,000 is actually a newer cap. The old cap prior, well, up through the middle of last year, this program only allowed individuals a $10,000 credit, but the legislature bumped it up to $20,000. So if you've done the microcredit program in the past, maybe you already got your $10,000 and you thought you were done for the rest of your life. Well, really, there's another $10,000 because the cap is now at $20,000. That $20,000 lifetime limit does apply to related parties, meaning parents and their children. The related party rules used to be a little more broad, and they included aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters. So you kind of had to know what all of your family members were doing and if they had ever received this credit. But now it's much more limited to parents and children. And if you're a parent or a child has already gotten some of the credit, then you're limited to the $20,000 minus whatever your relative has already received. But in theory, up to $20,000 credit. And the way it works is you earn a 20% credit on your increase in payroll or investment at your company. And you have 2 years to have the increase, and you're going to measure that increase based off of your base year. Your base year is the year prior to when you apply. So simply put, if you have 100,000 of new investment or new payroll over a 2-year period, $100,000 increase times a 20% credit equals $20,000 credit. So that's big picture. That's how it works. If you don't have new investment or new payroll, you can have one or the other. There's no minimum amount of new payroll, no minimum amount of new investment. And actually, if your investment or your payroll drops year to year, that even doesn't necessarily hurt you. You just kind of look at 1 year at a time to figure out what your benefit is. So little more into the details of it. Who can apply for this program? Eligible applications can only be filed by an individual, and the individual has to be actively engaged in the day-to-day activities of the business, of the microenterprise, which is kind of a weird concept. If you're going to earn tax credits on business activities, you would think the business would be the one that applies for it and gets the credit. But this is actually an individual credit. So typically, the owner, the primary owner, the person who's most involved would apply for the credit. If you had multiple owners, you in theory could each owner could apply for their share of the credit. In total, though, they're not going to allow more than the $20,000 for the business. We typically would advise multiple partners to just have one partner file for the credit and then split up the money amongst themselves, because the more applications you file, the more compliance work there is, and it's not an efficient way to go after this credit. So again, you need to be actively involved in the business to be able to apply for the credit. And then really important is you have to be a micro enterprise, which means the business has to have 5 or fewer full-time equivalents at the time you apply. And they actually measure that during the payroll period in which you apply. Once you file the application, the state's going to come back and say, hey, give us your payroll records for this period so we can verify that you don't have more than 5 full-time equivalents. Now, if you had some employees outside of Nebraska, I don't think those would count. We're really just talking about your Nebraska employees. So it's kind of crucial to know how many employees you have. And again, these are full-time equivalent calculations. So you do look at hours divided by the number of hours in the pay period to figure out if they're a full-time equivalent. If somebody worked overtime, they might end up being more than 1 full-time equivalent. So you kind of got to do that math. You also want to make sure that you're applying, before you hire somebody, that might push you over that 5 full-time equivalent limit, because once you're over 5, even if you're at 5.01, the state's going to say, oh, you're too big, you're no longer eligible for this credit. So that's an important consideration. Another thing is there's limited funding for the program every year. I'm not sure how much is available on a year-by-year basis, but the state has not run out of money in several years. Currently, or at least as of the last published information in July, there was still 2.7 million of microcredits available to be awarded for 2022. So I think that's a reflection on the program is a little difficult in terms of the compliance aspect, and maybe people have shied away from applying for it. So anyway, that is something to consider, that there is funding limitations, so you never know how that'll go. And then the last kind of big picture requirement is if you're going to hire new employees, the state mandates that you use E-Verify to check on the work eligibility of your new employees. If you're not familiar with E-Verify, it's a program run by the Homeland Security Department to basically make sure everyone's got valid U.S. work status. So if you don't verify your employees, and actually it's if you don't verify them timely, which the state says within 3 days of hire, if you don't do that, then the state will not let you treat that employee as a new employee. So basically their wages, the new payroll wouldn't count towards this program, and any other Nebraska credit program for that matter. So if you're going to apply for this, there's a November 1st hard cutoff date. So you have all year up until November 1st to apply for 2022. If you apply on November 2nd, 2022, the state will treat that as a 2023 application. And that's important because the year you apply is your first year of your attainment, if you will. You've got 2 years to earn the credit. Also, the year you apply establishes your base year, so your starting point for determining your employment and investment growth. So if you want to apply for 2022, you need to apply by November 1st. Just because you're applying, towards the end of the year in November or anytime after the first of the year, you still get to look back to January 1, the first day of the year, to determine new payroll and new investment. So if you've hired people already this year, or you purchased some equipment, had some other qualifying investment costs, you still get to count those. It's not, you don't just start from the date you apply. It goes back to the first of the year. And then the way you actually get the tax credit is the individual applicant on their Nebraska individual income tax return. You're going to fill out a form that shows your increased investment and employment, do the calculation, come up with your credit, and then that credit goes on the individual income tax return as a refundable credit, meaning even if your tax liability is zero, you still you'd get a refund for whatever your credit calculation is. Now you do the credit calculation every year based on actual data. When you apply, you're gonna put in expected growth and calculate your credit. And so you're basically asking for an amount of credit. You're not necessarily locked into that number. If I apply and I say, hey, I think I'm going to earn $20,000, the state in theory would then reserve that $20,000 for you, but it's up to you to actually have the increased investment and employment to earn it. And say you only earned 10,000, then that's all you're going to get. The other 10,000 of unused credit just kind of goes back into the pot for future years. So you do typically you want to apply for a realistic number, but hopefully it's the full $20,000. That way you're not limited to something less. Because if you only ask for 10,000 but you earn 20,000, you're only going to get the 10,000 because that's what you asked for. So just an aspect of the application process that's kind of important to know about. So as I mentioned earlier, it's a 20% credit, and the credit is 20% of your increase in investment and or compensation or payroll over your base year amount. And your base year is the year prior to when you apply. The increase in payroll, it actually is capped. Each employee's payroll or wages are capped at, currently it's $1,484 per week. So if you have somebody making more than that, you ignore the amount over that amount when you're doing your calculation. And that's kind of important to know, because if you say your only increase is going to be increase in payroll, and maybe it's not a new employee, maybe you're just saying, hey, I'm going to give somebody a raise and get a tax credit for it. Well, if they're already, if their raise puts them over this weekly limit, then the raise doesn't really count. So you have to factor that in. When this program was new years ago, sometimes we'd advise people to, hey, you're the owner, give yourself a raise to get the credit. And the state, has decided over time that that's not something they want to allow. So there is a weekly payroll limit that you have to take into account. On the investment side, so there's actually two buckets of two categories that you use to calculate your credit. There's investment and payroll, and they're treated separately. One does not impact the other. So on the investment side, you would add up your base year amounts and your current year amounts of depreciable asset purchases, repair and maintenance expense, advertising expense, legal and professional fees, and if you have an office lease, your increase in rent obligations. So you add up your current year amount, compare that with your base year amounts, and hopefully there's an increase there. That increase then would be taken times 20% to come up with your investment credit, if you will. And then separately from that, you do the compensation calculation, where again, you're able to look at wages. They also let you include health insurance contributions that the company pays on behalf of the employees. So you look at wages and health insurance for the base year, compare that with the current year wages. Hopefully you have an increase times 20%, and that's your compensation credit. You add the two credits together, and that's your credit for the year, assuming it doesn't exceed the 20, whatever was approved, $20,000 limit or whatever you asked for. You do have 2 years to earn the credit. So if you applied right now in 2022, you've got all of 2022 to measure your growth, and then all of 2023. So those 2 years, you would potentially earn credits in both years up to your maximum approved amount. And if for some reason your payroll or your investment goes down in one of those years, there's no penalty for that. You don't have to pay back your credit because you didn't maintain your levels. Once you earned the credit for a year, it should be yours to keep. So I've done a couple examples here just to kind of illustrate how it works. And again, this really isn't overly complex. The hardest thing about it is just gathering the documentation to satisfy the state, and that would be the application information. And then each year when you file your income tax return and you do the credit calculation, the state's going to ask you for the supporting documents. So that'll be payroll records, that'll be copies of invoices, things like that. So the compliance aspect of it is harder than it needs to be, but the actual credit calculation isn't that tough. So here's a fairly simple example. Company that has no employees during the prior year, the base year. And so let's say this is 2022. The company hires one employee at the beginning of the year, pays that employee $77,000, which happens to be on a weekly basis, that's the maximum allowed under the microcredit program. So no other employees hired or terminated during 2022 or 2023. Also, the company had no new investment in 22 or 23. So the way the credit would work for this one, it's only going to be based on the increase in payroll. So in year one, we've got 77,000 of new wages. So 77,000 times 20% is a $15,400 credit. So in year one, when the individual files their Nebraska income tax return, they're going to claim a credit of $15,400. Then in year two, you do the same analysis. You compare year two levels again against the base year, the original base year. You're not comparing it to the prior year. It's actually the base year. So in this case, comparing 2023 versus 2021 levels. Same facts. You had the one employee earning 77,000. So that 77,000 is your payroll increase times 20%. Again, it comes up to the 15,400 credit, but you've already gotten the 15,400 in the prior year. So the remainder, up to your $20,000 limit, the remaining credit is 4,600, which would go on the 2023 return. So over the 2 years, in this example, they got the full $20,000 purely through payroll. There was no new investment. It was just a new wages. In the second example, kind of a opposite fact pattern, no employees at all. Probably this would be, a really new startup company. The owner's probably not drawing a salary yet. No employees, just early stage company. But in 2021, the base year, let's say they had $10,000 of investment. Again, that could have been fixed asset purchases, legal and professional fees, advertising, repairs and maintenance, any of those categories. So 10,000 base year investment. Then in 2022, maybe they bought some new equipment, had some new startup costs, legal and professional fees, so $25,000. And then in 2023, bought some more new equipment, so $50,000 of investment in 2023. So for the first year credit, 2022, again, we're going to compare the 2022 investment versus base year 2021 investment. So we had an increase of $15,000 times 20% is a $3,000 credit for year one. Same thing for year two. We had a $40,000 increase versus the base year. That comes out to an $8,000 credit. So for the 2 years, you earned $11,000. If this particular applicant had asked for 20,000, but they only achieved 11, so 11 is all they're going to get. So again, you typically want to ask for the maximum amount, assuming that's realistic, but you're only going to earn whatever your actual calculation shows. So again, in this example, this is investment only. There was no new payroll. Doesn't matter. The payroll and the investment are two separate calculations. So in this third example, this one's kind of a hybrid example. Had one employee in 2021 who earned 40,000. No new employees after that, but you gave the sole employee a raise of $500 a week, which for this example, excuse me, I bumped them up to the maximum amount allowed for the microcredit. And I should mention the wage limit, the weekly wage limit changes every year. So I would imagine 2023, if you applied in 2023, you'd have a slightly higher wage limit. It's adjusted for inflation annually. But so again, this example, you essentially had an employee earning 40,000. Now they're earning 77,000. Not a new hire, just new wages. And then on the investment side, had 10,000 of base year investment. In 2022, only had 5,000 of new investment. And then in 2023, ramped it up and had 20,000. So it's had a decrease actually in 2022 and then an increase in 2023. So the way the credit works in year one, looking at the compensation side of things, we had 37,000 of new payroll, additional payroll. So that's going to generate a $7,400 payroll credit. Investment actually decreased, but you don't calculate a negative credit. The fact that there was no investment increase just means you get no investment credit. So year one, the credit is $7,400. In year two, same calculation. We had 37,000 of new wages, generates a $7,400 wage credit. And then on the investment side, we actually had an increase in investment that year, which is a $2,000 investment credit. So a total year two credit of 9,400. The 2 years combined, 16,800. Again, we didn't quite max out our $20,000 credit if that's what they had asked for. But 16,800 is better than nothing. And really, I hate to use the word free money, but that's what this program is. This investment, for companies like this, you're already making the investment. You're probably already going to hire the people. So if there's a tax benefit you can get out of it, it seems kind of silly not to apply and get it. But as I've noted, it sounds simple enough to claim the credit, but it's the application and the annual reporting that makes it slightly more difficult. So that is really a high-level overview of the microcredit program. We at Lutz do these. We used to do a ton of them. Like over 100 per year. And a lot of our clients had tapped out. They had already received their full $10,000 credit back when the limit was 10,000. So we kind of had run out of our existing clients that could take advantage of this. And then on top of that, the compliance aspect just got to be a little much. Somebody might earn 10,000 of credits if they got the maximum in the old days. But they might spend $3,000 on professional fees to earn the credit, and that's fees over a 2 or 3 year period. But the program kind of lost some of its luster just because of the compliance aspects of it. But now that the credit's up to 20,000 maximum, it probably makes a little more sense for companies to explore this and bigger bang for the buck, I would say. Again, this is a program that's really designed for your very small businesses, startup type businesses. And I should mention, I don't think I did, that there's no restriction on the type of business. You just have to be a Nebraska company. Doesn't matter where in Nebraska you're located. Doesn't matter what your industry is. Really, the key is you just can't have more than 5 full-time equivalents when you apply. And an interesting side note I'll mention, when this program was brand new, this came out in 2006. That was the first year, I believe. But back then, they actually said if you grew more than 5 full-time equivalents, not only were you not eligible to apply, but if you applied and had less than 5 employees, but then grew to more than 5, you had to pay back your credit, which was completely stupid. Like, we're going to punish you for growth. That's not the point of this program. So I got some legislation introduced years ago to fix that. So now they just measure your full-time equivalents when you apply, but if you grow beyond 5 after that, that's not going to hurt you. You still get your credit. So just a little side note there.
Well, thanks for doing that, Russ. We definitely hope our 5
Well,
companies
it didn't
grow
make
more than 5.
Yeah, it didn't make any sense. This is an incentive program that disincentivizes you from growing. So, but it didn't take much convincing for me to get that legislation passed. But I mentioned that because, again, this is a small program. There are some other programs that I'm not going to go into. There's other programs that might be better suited for different types of industries or larger companies. Specifically, I'll mention the Imagine Nebraska. That's kind of the newer generation incentive program that applies to targeted industries. You may have, formerly it was the Nebraska Advantage Act or LB 312. So this is the next generation program. There's also the Rural Advantage program that is aimed for lower population counties and communities. There's the Urban Redevelopment Act, which actually is a new program for targeted census tracts within Lincoln and Omaha only. And I'll mention the Urban Redevelopment Act. If you're in the Haymarket district or some other parts of Lincoln, you're eligible for that regardless of your industry type. However, the Innovation Campus is not eligible for the Urban Redevelopment Act. So just depends where you're located, whether you're eligible for that one. And then I also just mentioned the R&D credit. If you're a startup and you're doing R&D, there might be some easy credit money. And a lot of companies on the R&D side will maybe forego the federal R&D credit because they don't think they can get a benefit for it right away. But on the Nebraska side, as long as you do the federal credit, then on the Nebraska side, you can get a credit and it's a refundable credit. So you actually get a cash benefit for it, which might make it make more sense to actually do the federal credit when you otherwise might not. So those are just some programs I mentioned. If you wanted to learn more about those, I'd say contact me or talk to your CPA to learn more about those. But the micro program is really is a nice kind of free money program to help smaller companies get up and running. It's not huge dollars, but $20,000 is something I'd gladly take if I was eligible. But that's about it. I don't know if we have any questions.
Yeah, no, Russ, that was great information. I had one question. I think we had a couple come in the chat. Maybe just for confirmation. So this is a business application. Like you said, it's got to be less than 5 people, and there's the qualifications you went through. But the credit itself is for the individual's income or the individual's tax return.
That is true. Your calculations are totally based on the business activity, but when you fill out the application and when you claim the credit, the name that goes on the application form as the applicant is the individual who's actively engaged, and the individual is the one who receives the credit. So it's a little bit of a disconnect when you're trying to help a business grow and the business doesn't get the cash. So you might then, you could redeposit that money into the company or whatever, but yeah, it's a little backwards of how you would think it should work.
So is this only eligible for sole proprietorships, or say there is a co-founding team of 2 and they're both 50-50 partners? How would that work in mechanics?
Anybody can apply. So sole proprietorship, corporation, partnership, whatever. The issue is, a lot of times we'll have a company with multiple partners or shareholders, and they're like, hey, we're all involved in the business. We all want to apply for the credit. Well, they're only going to allow $20,000 for the company as a whole. So does it make, if you've got 4 partners, and I've done this before, if you've got four partners and they all want a piece of the credit, are you going to do 4 applications asking for $5,000 each? Because now you got 4 times the administrative cost. I mean, and 4 times the work. That doesn't make sense. That's just inefficient. You're better to just pick one person to apply, ask for the full 20, If he gets the full 20, then, have a side agreement where, hey, I'm going to give you your cut of this,
Yeah.
But to do four or to do multiple applications for one business is very inefficient.
Yeah.
And if you've ever been through one of these Nebraska audits, because they do audit these. When you file your return, they're going to look at all the documentation you provide, and you don't want to go through that more than you have to. So I always say, guys, partners, figure it out. One application is what you should do.
Another question in the chat. Have you seen any recent issues with businesses enrolling in E-Verify? And the question is basically, there's been recent technical difficulties and I haven't been able to get enrolled in E-Verify to get a number for the application over 2 weeks. If so, how do you suggest I move forward?
E-Verify from time to time is an issue. If there's a glitch where you can't get registered for it, that's not entirely unusual. Usually the glitch we see, and it's not so much a glitch, is that they make you, the enrollment process is a little bit of a hassle. I think there's a tutorial you have to do, a little online test or something.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll see it'll take our clients multiple days to complete the process.
Yeah.
Now, if there's an actual glitch where you can't do it for technology reasons, really the state, when you apply, they're going to want your E-Verify ID number, and they're going to want proof that you registered for E-Verify, and that's usually just by printing off a sheet from the E-Verify website. I think if you have a time-sensitive application and you're not able to get that E-Verify ID number, you could probably say, hey, state, we're working on it. Give us a break here because we haven't got it figured out.
Right.
And I would hope the state would say, okay, give us that as soon as you've got it. They might, if they were gonna be not very friendly, they might say, well, then your application isn't really accepted until you get that ID number.
Yeah.
But hopefully it'll resolve itself at some point. Now, if you applied on November 1st and you didn't have your E-Verify ID and the state decides to reject it for that, that's a bad fact pattern, because now you've gotten bumped into a different year, application year. So you do need, we generally, when I'm working with clients on getting ready to do an application, I'll say, number one, get registered for E-Verify. Let's get that process going because we want that ID number. But if you can't get it for technology reasons, then I'd just say, hey, state, sorry, we're working on it. So please be patient. The other part of E-Verify is when you're actually hiring people and doing E-Verify, from time to time, the E-Verify website will have outages. So you just need to document, why you E-Verified somebody late, because the state does have a 3-day rule. But if there are some exceptions to that, but you just want to document the reason why somebody was late, so you can, either it's an outage or maybe whoever does the E-Verify was on vacation. That's a valid reason, but you need to kind of be able to prove to the state if they ask about it later.
There's another question. What's the definition of advertising? I think they're referring to when you're talking about the investments and what that investment entails.
Oh, there's not really a definition. The law just says advertising. What the state does for actually verifying that is they look at your federal tax return, and the advertising line on the business tax return is what they use. So it's kind of if whatever you dump into that category for tax reporting purposes is considered advertising. And I would think that's a pretty broad category. To me, advertising is all kinds of marketing, your traditional advertising. So there's no definition. If you stuck something in advertising like, I don't even know. I mean, you could probably be pretty aggressive there. The state might scrutinize it and say, no, we don't think that's advertising. Then
yeah.
That could happen. It's never happened to me, but that, it's a possibility, but there is no definition.
And then last question, this is from the chat. If a small business started in 2022, can they apply in 2022 and the base would be 2022?
Yeah, the base would be 2021. That's your best fact pattern there. A brand new company in 2022 has 0 base levels. So anything that's happening in 2022 or 23 is new investment or new employment. Yeah, that's an ideal scenario.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, I talked about, like, imagine Nebraska. If you're a new startup and things are kind of slow and you don't have a ton of new investment or employment, it's great to apply now and get your $20,000, and then maybe 3 years from now, you're in a more of a growth pattern. Maybe one of these other programs is better, so you can kind of stack. Getting one credit doesn't negate you or limit you from getting another credit down the road. You can't overlap. You can't claim the same investment and employment for multiple credits, but it's not unusual to start out with micro, then move on to these bigger credits as the business grows.
Right. Well, Russ, this was excellent. Your contact information is on the screen. If someone's interested in getting in touch with you or the Lutz team, it sounds like this is the best way to connect.
Yeah, phone, email. Yeah, would love to help if you need it. If even if you've got your own CPA firm, just ask them about these programs. It's really foolish to not take advantage of these programs, because they're not that hard to, like I said, it's free money.
Yeah.
You'd be silly not to take advantage of it.
Wonderful. Well, Russ, we're really thankful for your time this afternoon. And for those of you that are joining in live, thanks for joining this most recent Combine Resource Program. And it will be shared in the resource folder as well as our YouTube channel online. So thank you for everybody joining in. Have a great rest of your day.